24 centuries. That's how long Plato's ideas have been shaping the way humans think, and they haven't aged a day. Born around 428 BC in Athens, Plato wasn't just a philosopher. He was the philosopher, the one who drew the line between the world we see and the world that actually matters. Before him, thinkers asked questions about nature, about the stars, about matter. Plato turned the lens inward. He asked, what is justice? What is truth? What is the good life? And more importantly, why do most people get it wrong? He was a student of Socrates, and when Athens executed Socrates for asking too many uncomfortable questions, something broke inside Plato. That event shaped everything he wrote, every dialogue, every argument. It lit a fire that never went out. Plato founded the Academy, one of the first institutions of higher learning in the Western world. He trained Aristotle. He laid the groundwork for ethics, metaphysics, political theory, epistemology. Nearly every branch of philosophy traces a root back to him. The philosopher Alfred North Whitehead once said that all of Western philosophy is just a series of footnotes to Plato, and he wasn't exaggerating. But here's what makes Plato different from most ancient thinkers. He doesn't just give you answers, he forces you to think. His dialogues are built on tension, on contradiction, on stripping away assumptions until you're left standing with nothing and then rebuilding from there. Plato challenges power. He challenges pleasure. He challenges the very idea that what you see is what's real. And that's why he's not just relevant, he's necessary. So let's walk through his philosophy, not as a history lesson, but as a confrontation with ideas that still cut deep. Most people think love is about finding someone. Plato says, no, love isn't about a person, it's about what that person points you toward. In the Symposium, Plato stages a dinner party. A group of Athenian men, poets, politicians, philosophers, each take turns giving a speech about eros, about love, and each speech builds on the last. But the real weight lands when Socrates speaks, and what he delivers isn't romance. It's a revolution in how we understand desire itself. Plato argues, through the voice of Socrates and a mysterious priestess named Diotima, that love is not a god. Love is a spirit, a force between mortal and divine. It's not about possession, it's about lack. We love because we are incomplete. We desire because something is missing. And here's where it gets sharp. Plato claims that physical attraction, that initial pull toward a beautiful body, is just the lowest rung of a much larger ladder. He calls it the ladder of love. You start with one beautiful body. Then you recognize beauty in all bodies. Then you move beyond bodies entirely, toward beautiful ideas, beautiful knowledge, beautiful truths. And at the top, the form of beauty itself, pure, eternal, unchanging. So for Plato, romantic love is not the destination, it's the doorway. And most people never walk through it. They stay stuck on that first rung, obsessed with the physical, never realizing that what they're really longing for is something far greater. He doesn't dismiss desire, he redirects it. He argues that eros, properly understood, is the engine of philosophy itself. The love of wisdom, philosophia, is, at its core, a form of love. That's a radical claim, and it's one that reframes everything we think we know about what it means to love. Here's one of Plato's most controversial ideas, and honestly, it should make you uncomfortable. In the Republic, Plato proposes what he calls the noble lie, a myth deliberately crafted, told to the citizens of a just city to maintain social order, not because it's true, but because it works. The lie goes like this. Every citizen is born from the earth, brothers and sisters of the same soil. But the gods mixed different metals into their souls: gold for the rulers, silver for the warriors, bronze and iron for the workers. And each person must accept their place, because it was divinely assigned. Now, Plato isn't naive. He knows it's a fabrication. He says so. But he argues that without a shared story, a foundational myth that binds people together, no society can hold.
People need to believe in something larger than themselves. Otherwise, self-interest tears the city apart. And this is where it gets uncomfortable, because Plato is essentially saying that truth alone isn't enough to govern, that pure rationality can't sustain a political community. You need narrative, you need belief, even if that belief is engineered. He's not endorsing deception for personal gain. He draws a hard line there.
The noble lie serves the collective good, not the ambitions of a tyrant. But still, the idea that a just society might require a constructed myth at its foundation, that's a deeply unsettling thought. And yet, look around. Every nation has its founding myths, its sacred stories, its symbols that hold people together. Plato saw this 2,400 years ago. He didn't flinch from it. He named it. That's what makes this idea so powerful. Not because Plato endorses lying, but because he forces us to ask, can any civilization survive on truth alone? Most people think of God as a creator, someone who builds everything from nothing. Plato didn't see it that way. In the Timaeus, he introduces the Demiurge, a divine craftsman, not a creator from scratch, a shaper, an organizer. The Demiurge doesn't conjure matter into existence. He finds it already there, raw, chaotic, formless, and he molds it.
He looks up at the eternal forms, the perfect blueprints, and sculpts the physical world to resemble them as closely as possible. And this is a critical distinction. Plato's God doesn't create out of nothing. He works with what's already given. He's bound by the material he has. The forms are perfect, matter is not. So the world we live in, it's the best possible copy, but it's still a copy. Plato argues the Demiurge is rational, benevolent, and good. He doesn't create out of ego or need. He creates because goodness naturally overflows. It shares itself. The cosmos isn't an accident. It's an act of generosity. But here's where it gets interesting. The Demiurge isn't omnipotent, not in the way later religious traditions would define God. He can't override the limitations of matter. He can't force chaos to become perfection. He persuades it. Plato actually uses that word, persuasion. Necessity has its own stubbornness, and even a divine craftsman has to negotiate with it. So the universe, for Plato, is a living and souled being, rational, ordered, beautiful, but imperfect. Not because the craftsman failed, because the raw material itself resists perfection. This is Plato's theology stripped to its core. God is not a tyrant who commands reality into being. He's an artist who shapes it. And the gap between the blueprint and the finished product, that's the gap we live in. Plato doesn't sugarcoat human nature. In the Republic, he lays it out plain. There's a war happening inside every person, and most people are losing it. He divides the soul into 3 parts: reason, spirit, appetite. Each one pulls in a different direction. Reason seeks truth. Spirit seeks honor. Appetite seeks pleasure. Food, drink, sex, money. All the things that feel urgent but aren't necessarily good. And Plato doesn't just describe this. He gives it a vivid image. In the Phaedrus, he compares the soul to a chariot. Reason is the charioteer. Spirit is the noble horse, proud, disciplined, responsive to commands. And appetite is the wild horse, unruly, hungry, constantly dragging the chariot off course. But it gets even more visceral. In Book 9 of the Republic, Plato describes the soul as 3 creatures fused into one body: a human, a lion, and a many-headed beast. The beast is appetite, constantly shifting, constantly craving. The lion is spirit, fierce but trainable. And the human? That's reason, small, quiet, easily overpowered if it doesn't assert control.
Plato argues that justice, real justice, is the proper ordering of these 3 parts. Reason leads, spirit enforces, appetite obeys. When this hierarchy holds, a person is balanced, functional, free. When it collapses, when appetite takes the wheel, that's how tyrants are born. Not just political tyrants, internal ones. He warns that the undisciplined soul doesn't just suffer, it enslaves itself. A person ruled by appetite thinks they're free. They're chasing what they want after all. But Plato sees it differently. That person is a prisoner of their own cravings. The owner's manual is simple. Let reason rule. Train the lion, starve the beast. That's Plato's formula for a well-ordered soul. Plato doesn't think all knowledge is created equal. In fact, he argues most of what we call knowing barely qualifies. In Book 6 of the Republic, he lays out the divided line, a framework that splits reality into 2 realms and knowledge into 4 levels. It's precise, it's hierarchical, and it's devastating for anyone who thinks seeing is believing. At the bottom, the lowest rung, is ikasia, imagination, shadows, reflections, images of images. This is the person who mistakes appearances for truth, who takes surfaces at face value and never looks deeper. Plato argues this is the most common state of mind and the most dangerous. One step up is pistis, belief. This is where most people live. You see a tree, you see a horse, you interact with the physical world, and you trust it. It's real, sure, but for Plato, it's still the visible realm, still the world of change, decay, impermanence. You're dealing with objects, not truths. Then comes dianoia, thought. This is the realm of mathematics, logic, abstract reasoning. You're no longer looking at things, you're working with concepts. A geometer doesn't need to see a triangle to understand it. But even here, Plato says, you're still relying on assumptions, hypotheses, starting points you haven't fully examined. And at the top, noesis, pure understanding, direct apprehension of the forms themselves. No images, no assumptions, no props. This is the philosopher's destination, the mind grasping reality itself, unmediated. Plato argues this is the only level that deserves to be called true knowledge. The divided line isn't just an intellectual exercise, it's a challenge. Plato is asking, where are you on this line? Because most people never make it past the second rung. They think they know, but they're still staring at shadows. Plato's most iconic idea, and arguably the most powerful image in the entire history of philosophy. In Book 7 of the Republic, Plato describes a group of prisoners, chained inside a dark cave since birth. They can't move, can't turn their heads. All they see is the wall in front of them. Behind them, there's a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, people walk back and forth carrying objects. Statues, figures, shapes. The fire casts shadows of those objects onto the wall. And the prisoners? They think those shadows are reality. That's all they've ever known. Now here's where it gets interesting.
one prisoner breaks free. He turns around, sees the fire. His eyes burn. He stumbles out of the cave and into the sunlight. At first, it's blinding, painful, but slowly his eyes adjust. He sees trees, rivers, the sky. He sees the sun itself, the source of all light. And Plato says that sun, that's the form of the good, the highest truth, the ultimate reality. But here's the part most people miss. The freed prisoner goes back. He returns to the cave to tell the others what he's seen. And what do? They mock him. They resist him. Plato even suggests they'd kill him if they could. Sound familiar? Plato is making a direct reference to Socrates, the man who saw truth clearly and was executed for it. So what's Plato really saying? He's saying most people live in chains, not physical chains, chains of ignorance, illusion, and comfort. They mistake shadows for substance, opinions for knowledge. And when someone challenges that, they don't thank him, they destroy him. The allegory isn't just a story, it's a warning. Plato warns that truth is not welcomed, it's resisted. And the path toward it is painful, disorienting, lonely. But he makes it clear, it's the only path worth walking.
Most people know Plato as a philosopher of ideas, ethics, politics. But here's something that often gets overlooked. Plato was deeply, seriously committed to mathematics, not just as a tool for measurement. He saw it as the very language of reality. Above the entrance to his academy, the inscription reportedly read, "Let no one ignorant of geometry enter here." That wasn't a suggestion, it was a prerequisite, and it tells you everything about how Plato thought. In the Timaeus, Plato lays out one of the most ambitious claims in ancient thought. He argues that the physical universe was shaped by a divine craftsman, the Demiurge, and this craftsman didn't work with clay or chaos. He used geometry as his blueprint. Plato assigns each of the 4 classical elements to a specific geometric solid. Fire is the tetrahedron, sharp, pointed, cutting. Earth is stable, grounded, immovable. Air is the octahedron, water the icosahedron. And the 5th solid, the dodecahedron, Plato reserves for the cosmos itself, the shape of the entire universe. These 5 shapes are now called the Platonic solids, perfect 3-dimensional forms where every face is identical, every angle equal. And Plato believed they were the fundamental building blocks of all physical matter. Was he right in a literal scientific sense? No, but here's what's remarkable. The deeper idea that the universe has an inherent mathematical structure, that nature follows precise geometric patterns, modern physics runs on exactly that assumption. Plato didn't have equations or particle accelerators, but he grasped something that took centuries to fully appreciate. He argues that beneath the surface of the physical world, there is order, deep, unshakable order, and that order is mathematical. You cannot understand reality, Plato insists, without first understanding geometry, not as calculation, as a way of seeing. One of Plato's most radical and most controversial political ideas, straight from the Republic, Plato argues that the ideal state cannot be ruled by warriors, the wealthy, or the popular vote. It must be ruled by philosophers, by what he calls the Philosopher King. Why? Because Plato believes governing is not a matter of ambition or charisma, it's a matter of knowledge, and not just any knowledge, knowledge of the good, of justice, truth, and the nature of reality itself. Only someone who has grasped the forms, who has climbed out of the cave and seen the sun, only that person is fit to lead. And here's the twist. He says the philosopher doesn't want to rule.
That's exactly what qualifies him. The person who craves power is the last person who should have it. The philosopher would rather spend his life in contemplation, but Plato argues he has a duty, a moral obligation to return to the cave and guide the others. Plato is deeply skeptical of democracy. He watched Athenian democracy condemn Socrates to death. The wisest man in Athens killed by majority vote. That scarred him, and it shaped his entire political philosophy. He compares democracy to a ship where the passengers overthrow the navigator and steer by popular opinion. No expertise, no training, just the loudest voice wins. And where does that ship end up? Nowhere good.
So Plato proposes something radical. The rulers must be educated for decades in mathematics, dialectic, philosophy. They must live without private property or family to eliminate personal ambition. Tested, refined, proven before they're allowed anywhere near power. It's not a democracy. It's not a tyranny. It's an aristocracy of wisdom. And Plato argues it's the only system capable of producing true justice. You don't have to agree with him, but the question he raises still cuts. Should the people who govern us actually understand what justice is?
Here's what makes Plato remarkable. He didn't just build one of the most ambitious philosophical systems in history, he attacked it himself. In the Parmenides, Plato raises a devastating objection against his own theory of forms, and he doesn't soften the blow. The argument goes like this. Take something large, a mountain, say. Plato's theory says that mountain is large because it participates in the form of largeness. Fine. But now look at the mountain and the form of largeness side by side. They share something in common. They're both large in some sense. So what explains that similarity? By Plato's own logic, there must be a third thing, another form, that accounts for what the mountain and the original form of largeness have in common. And here's the problem. That third form now shares something with the first two. So you need a fourth, then a fifth, then a sixth. It never ends. An infinite regress. The whole structure collapses under its own weight. This is called the third man argument, and Plato puts it in the mouth of a young Socrates getting schooled by the elder Parmenides. That's not an accident. Plato is dramatizing his own intellectual humility. He's saying, I see the crack in the foundation. I'm not going to pretend it's not there. Now, did he ever solve it? That's debated. Some scholars argue his later dialogues quietly revise the theory. Others say he left the wound open on purpose.
A challenge for future thinkers. But what's undeniable is this. Plato didn't hide from the hardest objection to his own philosophy. He wrote it down. He preserved it. He made it part of the canon. That's not weakness. That's the mark of a thinker who cares more about truth than about being right. Plato doesn't just believe in the immortality of the soul. He argues for it, rigorously. In the Phaedo, his account of Socrates' final hours, he lays out 4 distinct arguments, not appeals to faith, not wishful thinking, philosophical proofs. The first is the argument from opposites. Plato observes that everything in nature comes from its opposite. Hot comes from cold, waking comes from sleeping. So life, he argues, must come from death, and death from life. The soul cycles, it doesn't vanish. The second is the argument from Recollection. Plato points out that we grasp concepts, equality, beauty, justice, that we've never encountered in their pure form in the physical world. So where did that knowledge come from? His answer, the soul knew these things before it entered the body. It existed before birth. And if it existed before birth, it's not bound to the body's timeline. The third is the affinity argument. Plato draws a sharp line between 2 kinds of reality.
The body is visible, changing, decomposable. The soul is invisible, stable, and drawn toward what is eternal, the forms. He argues the soul resembles the divine and imperishable more than the physical and perishable. Like is drawn to like, and what resembles the eternal doesn't simply cease. The fourth, and the most metaphysically ambitious, is the argument from the form of life. Plato contends that the soul doesn't just have life, it is life. It participates in the form of life itself. And since life and death are opposites, the soul can never admit death. It's a contradiction in terms. The soul, by its very nature, is deathless. Now, are these proofs airtight? Aristotle didn't think so. Many philosophers since have pushed back hard, but that's not really the point. The point is, Plato treated the soul's survival not as a comforting myth, but as something reason itself demands you take seriously.
In Book 6 of the Republic, Plato makes one of the boldest moves in the history of philosophy. He compares the form of the good, the highest reality in his entire system, to the sun. And it's not a casual metaphor, it's the architecture of everything. Here's how Plato lays it out. In the visible world, the sun does two things. It provides light, which makes sight possible, and it provides life, which makes growth and existence possible. Without the sun, you can't see, and without the sun, nothing lives. Plato argues the form of the good works exactly the same way, but in the intelligible world. The good provides truth, which makes knowledge possible, and it provides being, which gives the forms themselves their existence and their essence. Without the good, you can't know anything, and without the good, nothing truly is. That's a staggering claim. He's saying the good isn't just one form among many. It's not sitting alongside justice and beauty as an equal. It's above them. It's the source. The condition that makes all other forms real and knowable. And Plato goes even further. He says the good is beyond being. It's not just another thing that exists. It's the reason anything exists at all. It transcends the very category of existence. This is where Plato stops being just a philosopher and starts sounding like a metaphysical architect. He's constructing a hierarchy of reality, and at the very top, there's something that can't even be fully described, only approached, only glimpsed, like staring into the sun itself. And that's the point. Plato warns that most people can't handle this kind of truth. Their eyes aren't ready. They've spent too long in the shadows. The good is there. It's always been there. But seeing it, that requires a kind of vision most people never develop. Here's a question that'll stop you in your tracks. How do you search for something you don't know? Plato raises this in the Meno, and it's not a casual question. It's a philosophical grenade. Meno puts it to Socrates directly. If you don't know what virtue is, how would you even begin looking for it? And if you somehow stumbled upon it, how would you recognize it? Think about that. If you already know the answer, you don't need to search. If you don't know the answer, you wouldn't recognize it even if it was right in front of you. Either way, inquiry seems impossible. This is what scholars call Meno's paradox, and it's brilliant because it threatens to shut down philosophy entirely. Why ask questions at all if the search itself is doomed from the start? But Plato doesn't flinch. He has an answer, and it's radical. He argues that learning is not acquisition, it's recollection. The soul, Plato claims, is immortal. It existed before this body, before this life. And in that prior existence, it already encountered all truths. Every form, every essence. The soul already knows everything. So, what happens when we learn something? We're not discovering it for the first time. We're remembering. Plato calls this anamnesis, recollection. He demonstrates this in the dialogue itself. Socrates takes an uneducated slave boy and, through a series of questions, just questions, no teaching, leads the boy to arrive at a geometric truth on his own. The boy wasn't taught, he was guided to remember what his soul already knew.
And that's Plato's move. He turns the paradox on its head. The reason we can search for what we don't know is because deep down, we do know it. We've just forgotten. Knowledge isn't built, it's recovered. If Plato had a nemesis, it wasn't a single person. It was a whole profession, the Sophists. These were traveling intellectuals in ancient Athens. They charged money, sometimes a lot of money, to teach young men how to speak, how to argue, how to win. And that last part is key. Winning. Not truth, not understanding. Winning. Plato despises them, and he doesn't hide it. He sees the Sophists as dealers in appearances. They don't pursue wisdom, they sell the illusion of it. They teach rhetoric, persuasion, how to make the weaker argument defeat the stronger one, how to make a crowd believe whatever you want them to believe. Truth? Irrelevant. What matters is what sounds true. And for Plato, this is dangerous, not just intellectually, morally. He argues in the Gorgias that rhetoric without philosophy is flattery. It's cosmetics for the soul. It makes things look good without making them good. The sophist doesn't heal, he decorates. He doesn't educate, he performs. Protagoras, one of the most famous sophists, declared that man is the measure of all things. Plato rejects this completely. If every person's perception is equally valid, then there's no truth, no standard, no difference between knowledge and opinion. And that, for Plato, is the death of philosophy. So what separates the philosopher from the sophist? Plato makes it razor sharp. The philosopher loves truth. The sophist loves applause. The philosopher seeks to understand. The sophist seeks to impress. One serves wisdom, the other sells it. And here's what makes this battle timeless. Look around. The sophists didn't disappear. They evolved. They're in media, in politics, in marketing, anywhere language is used not to reveal truth, but to manufacture consent. Plato saw it coming 24 centuries ago. Plato doesn't see the soul as one thing. He sees it as three. In the Republic, he lays out one of his most powerful ideas, the tripartite soul. The soul, Plato argues, is divided into three distinct parts, and each one pulls you in a different direction. First, appetite, the largest part, the hungriest. It craves food, drink, sex, money, comfort, anything that satisfies the body. It doesn't think, it wants, and it never stops wanting. Second, spirit. This is the part that fights. It's where anger lives, where pride lives, where ambition lives. It's the part that flares up when you feel disrespected. The part that wants honor, recognition, victory. Spirit isn't mindless, but it's not rational either. It runs on emotion. Third, reason. The highest part. The part that thinks, calculates, reflects. It sees beyond the moment. It asks not, what do I want, but what is right. Plato argues this is the part that should rule, always. And here's the tension. These three parts are constantly at war. Appetite drags you toward pleasure. Spirit pushes you toward glory. He compares it in the Phaedrus to a charioteer driving two horses. One horse is noble and disciplined. That's spirit when it's aligned with reason. The other is wild, stubborn, constantly lurching toward desire. That's appetite. The charioteer is reason, and his job is to keep both horses under control. Justice for Plato isn't just a political concept, it's a psychological one. A just soul is one where reason rules, spirit supports, and appetite obeys. When that order breaks down, when desire or ego takes the reins, the soul descends into chaos. That's the monster, and only reason can tame it. The freed prisoner returns to the cave, and this is where Plato's allegory turns from philosophy into tragedy. Plato describes a man who has seen the sun, who has witnessed reality as it truly is, not shadows, not echoes, but the actual forms, the truth. And what does he do? He goes back into the darkness, back to the people still chained, still staring at flickering images on a wall, still convinced that's all there is. He tries to tell them, he tries to explain what he's seen, and they laugh at him, they mock him, they think he's lost his mind. But Plato doesn't stop there. He pushes further. He says the prisoners wouldn't just dismiss the freedman, they would hate him. They'd say the journey ruined his eyes, that he went up and came back unable to see. And if anyone tried to free them the way he was freed, Plato says they would kill him if they could get their hands on him. That's not hypothetical. Plato is talking about Socrates. This is the part of the allegory most people gloss over, but it's the core.
Plato isn't just making a point about ignorance. He's making a point about what happens to the person who disrupts it. The truth teller doesn't get a parade, he gets a death sentence. Plato argues that the masses don't reject truth because they can't understand it. They reject it because it threatens everything they've built their lives around, their comfort, their certainty, their entire sense of reality. And the philosopher, he knows this. He knows what's waiting for him if he goes back. But Plato insists he must go back. That's the duty. That's the burden. Not because the cave will welcome him, it won't, but because truth isn't something you get to keep for yourself. That's Plato's most heartbreaking lesson. The ones who see the clearest are the ones who suffer the most. Plato asks one of the most dangerous questions in the history of philosophy. What is justice? Book 1 of the Republic opens with this, and Plato, through Socrates, doesn't ask it casually. He takes every answer that's offered and tears it apart, methodically, ruthlessly. First up, Cephalus, an old, wealthy man. He says justice is simple. Tell the truth, pay your debts. Plato dismantles this in seconds. What if a friend lends you a weapon and then goes mad? Do you return it? Telling the truth and paying debts isn't justice. It's a rule, and rules break. Then Polemarchus steps in. He refines it. Justice is helping your friends and harming your enemies. Sounds reasonable, right? But Plato pushes back hard. What if you're wrong about who your friends are? What if the person you think is good turns out to be corrupt? And more fundamentally, Plato argues that a truly just person would never harm anyone, because harming someone only makes them worse, and making people worse is the opposite of justice. Then comes Thrasymachus, the most aggressive voice in the room. He says justice is nothing but the advantage of the stronger. The powerful make the rules, the weak follow. No morality, no higher good, just power. And this is the answer Plato takes the most seriously, because it's the most dangerous. He doesn't just argue against it. He spends the rest of the Republic building an entire political philosophy to refute it. Plato's point is sharp. Everyone thinks they know what justice is, but when you press them, when you really press, their answers collapse. Justice isn't a slogan. It isn't a feeling, and it's definitely not whatever the powerful say it is. Plato argues that justice is something real, something structural,
something that exists whether people recognize it or not, and finding it takes more than opinion, it takes philosophy. Plato tells a story about a ship, and it's one of the most brutally relevant analogies he ever wrote. Here's how it goes. There's a ship at sea. The owner is big, strong, but partially deaf and short-sighted. He doesn't really understand navigation. The sailors are all fighting each other for control of the helm. None of them have been trained. None of them know how to read the stars, the winds, the seasons. But every single one of them thinks he deserves to steer. And the one person on board who actually knows how to navigate, the one who studied the stars, who understands the currents, they call him useless, a stargazer, a waste of space. That's Plato's analogy for democracy. The ship is the state. The owner is the people. The sailors clawing for the wheel are the politicians, ambitious, loud, manipulative. And the true navigator? That's the philosopher, the expert, the one who actually knows where the ship should go. Plato argues that in a democracy, persuasion replaces competence. It doesn't matter if you know what's right. What matters is whether you can convince the crowd. And the crowd, Plato warns, doesn't want to be guided by someone who knows the truth. They want someone who tells them what they want to hear. So the expert gets sidelined, mocked, ignored. Plato isn't saying this out of arrogance. He's saying it out of grief. He watched Athens, the birthplace of democracy, execute the wisest man he ever knew. Socrates didn't lose an argument. He lost a popularity contest. And that's the core of Plato's warning. When a society treats every opinion as equal, when the uninformed voice carries the same weight as the informed one, the ship doesn't reach port. It drifts, or it sinks. Expertise isn't optional. Plato argues it's the only thing that can save the ship. Here's the thing most people miss about Plato. He doesn't just have opinions about politics or ethics or the soul. He builds an entire metaphysics, a whole system of reality. And at the center of it sits one of the most radical ideas in the history of human thought, the theory of forms. Plato argues that everything you see around you, every tree, every chair, every human face, is not fully real. It's a copy, a shadow, a rough imitation of something higher, something perfect, something eternal. He calls these higher realities forms, or ideas, depending on how you translate the Greek. So when you see a beautiful sunset, Plato says you're not seeing beauty itself. You're seeing a particular thing that participates in the form of beauty. The sunset fades, it changes, it disappears. But the form of beauty, that never changes, never decays, never dies. And this applies to everything: justice, courage, equality, goodness. For Plato, each of these has a perfect, unchanging form that exists beyond the physical world, beyond space, beyond time. Now, why does this matter? Because Plato draws a hard line between knowledge and opinion. If you're looking at the physical world, you're only dealing in opinion, shifting, unstable, unreliable opinion. But if you grasp the forms through reason, through philosophy, then you've reached true knowledge, the kind that doesn't waver. He's essentially saying the world you trust most, the one you can touch and taste and see, is the least real. And the world you can't see at all, that's the one that actually matters. It's a staggering claim, and Plato doesn't flinch from it, not once. Plato doesn't just tell you there are two levels of reality. He maps them out, precisely. In Book 6 of the Republic, he presents what's known as the divided line, a single vertical line split into 4 segments. Each segment represents a different level of awareness, a different relationship with truth. At the bottom, illusion, shadows, reflections, images.
Plato calls this ikasia. You're not seeing real things. You're seeing copies of copies, and you don't even know it. One step up, belief. Pistis. You're now looking at physical objects, real trees, real people. But Plato argues this still isn't knowledge. It's just opinion about the visible world.
Better than illusion, sure, but still limited. Now you cross the line. You move from the visible world into the intelligible world, and here's where things sharpen. The third level is dianoia, reasoning, mathematical thinking, abstract logic. You're working with concepts now, not objects, but you're still relying on assumptions, hypotheses, starting points you haven't fully examined.
And then, the top, noesis, pure understanding, direct knowledge of the forms. No assumptions, no images, just the mind grasping reality as it truly is. Plato argues that most people spend their entire lives trapped in the bottom two segments. They think they see clearly, they don't. They're dealing with shadows and surfaces and calling it truth. And the philosopher? The philosopher is the one who climbs, who pushes past belief, past abstract reasoning, all the way to the top, to the form of the good, which Plato places at the very summit of all reality. This isn't just a diagram, it's a challenge. Plato's asking, where on this line do you actually live? Most people don't want to answer that honestly. Here's one of the great ironies of intellectual history. The phrase Platonic love gets thrown around constantly, and almost nobody uses it the way Plato meant it. People think it means love without desire, friendship without passion, something tame, safe, watered down. Plato meant the exact opposite. In the Symposium, he lays out a vision of love, eros, that is anything but passive. Plato argues, through the voice of Diotima, that love is a force, a drive, a hunger that begins in the body but doesn't stay there. It starts with physical attraction. You see a beautiful person and something stirs. Plato doesn't deny that. He doesn't reject it. But he says that's just the first step. Because once you've loved one beautiful body, you start to notice beauty in other bodies. And then you realize the beauty isn't really about the body at all. It's something deeper, something shared. So you move upward, from beautiful bodies to beautiful souls, from beautiful souls to beautiful ideas, from beautiful ideas to beauty in laws, in institutions, in knowledge itself. And at the very top of this ladder, the form of beauty, pure, eternal, unchanging, not beautiful in one way but not another, not beautiful at one time but not another, just beauty, absolute. Plato argues that this is what love is really for. It's the soul's ascent. Eros isn't something to suppress or be ashamed of. It's the engine that pulls you toward truth, toward the highest reality. So Platonic love isn't love with the passion removed. For Plato, it's love with the passion redirected, upward, towards something that doesn't fade, doesn't age, doesn't die. That's a far more radical idea than most people realize. Everyone's heard of Atlantis, the lost civilization, swallowed by the sea. Hollywood loves it. Conspiracy theorists love it even more. But here's the thing most people don't realize. Atlantis comes from Plato. He invented it. In two late dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, Plato describes a powerful island civilization that existed roughly 9,000 years before his time. Atlantis was vast, technologically advanced, militarily dominant.
It had concentric rings of water and land, magnificent architecture, and enormous wealth. It was, by every measure, an empire at its peak, and then it was gone, destroyed in a single day and night, sunk beneath the ocean by divine judgment.
But Plato doesn't tell this story to entertain, he tells it to warn. He presents Atlantis as a civilization corrupted by its own power. The Atlanteans started noble, close to the gods, governed by virtue. But over time, wealth and ambition rotted them from the inside. They became greedy, aggressive, expansionist. And when their moral decay reached its limit, the gods wiped them out. So Atlantis isn't a mystery to be solved. It's a mirror. Plato uses it to contrast with his vision of an ideal Athens, a smaller, humbler city that defeated the Atlantean threat through discipline and justice. The message is sharp. Power without virtue is self-destruction on a timer. And yet, for centuries, people have searched for the real Atlantis. They've pointed to Santorini, to the coast of Spain, to the Caribbean. They've missed the point entirely. Plato wasn't writing geography. He was writing philosophy. He crafted a myth to make a moral argument that no empire, no matter how mighty, survives its own corruption. Atlantis didn't sink because of an earthquake. It sank because it forgot what mattered. This is the one that started it all, the moment that shaped Plato forever. In the Apology, Plato reconstructs Socrates' defense speech at his trial in 399 BC. The charges? Corrupting the youth of Athens and impiety toward the gods. The real offense? Socrates made powerful people look foolish, and they couldn't forgive him for it. Plato presents Socrates not as a man begging for his life, but as a man refusing to compromise his mission. Socrates tells the jury that he was assigned his role by the god at Delphi. The oracle declared that no one was wiser than Socrates, and Socrates, stunned by this, set out to prove the oracle wrong. He questioned politicians, poets, craftsmen, anyone with a reputation for wisdom. And every time he found the same thing. They didn't actually know what they claimed to know. So Plato shows us a Socrates who arrives at a strange conclusion. He's the wisest, not because he knows the most, but because he knows nothing. That single insight separates him from everyone else. And when the jury convicts him, Socrates doesn't break. He doesn't beg. Plato portrays him as calm, almost defiant. He tells the jury that death might be a blessing, either a dreamless sleep or a journey to another world where he can question the great minds of the past. Either way, he says, it holds no terror. Plato uses this dialogue to make something unmistakably clear. Philosophy is not a hobby. It's not an academic exercise. It's a life or death commitment to truth, and the world will punish you for it. The Apology isn't just a courtroom drama. It's Plato's declaration of what philosophy costs and what it's worth. What if you already know everything? You've just forgotten it. That's the radical claim Plato makes in the Meno and the Phaedo. He calls it anamnesis, the theory of recollection, and it turns the entire concept of learning upside down. Plato argues that the soul is immortal. It existed before birth, and in that prior existence it had direct contact with the forms, the perfect eternal truths that underlie reality, justice, beauty, equality. The soul knew them all, but when it entered a physical body, that knowledge was buried, clouded by sensation, distorted by the material world. So what we call learning, Plato says, isn't learning at all. It's remembering. Every moment of genuine understanding is the soul recovering what it once knew. And he doesn't just assert this, he demonstrates it. In the Meno,
Plato has Socrates pull aside an uneducated slave boy and walk him through a geometry problem. No instruction, just questions, and step by step, the boy arrives at the correct answer, an answer he was never taught. Plato uses this as proof. The knowledge was already inside him. Socrates just helped him dig it out. Now, this isn't a small claim. It reshapes everything. If knowledge is recollection, then education isn't about filling an empty mind. It's about awakening what's already there. The teacher doesn't give you truth. The teacher helps you remember it. And it goes deeper. Plato ties this directly to the immortality of the soul. If we can recall truths we were never taught in this life, then the soul must have existed before this life. Recollection becomes evidence for the soul's eternal nature. It's a breathtaking argument, not because it's provable, but because it reframes what it means to know anything at all.
What would you do if you could get away with anything? In Book 2 of the Republic, Glaucon, Plato's brother, throws this question on the table, and he doesn't hold back. He tells the story of Gyges, a shepherd who discovers a ring that makes him invisible. And what does Gyges do with this power? He sneaks into the palace, seduces the queen, murders the king. Takes the throne. No consequences, no punishment. No one even knows. Glaucon's argument is blunt. Strip away the fear of getting caught, and no one, absolutely no one, would choose to be just. Justice, he claims, is just a contract. A deal we make because we're too weak to get away with injustice. Given real freedom, every person would act in pure self-interest. Morality is a leash. Remove it, and the beast comes out. And this isn't some throwaway provocation. Glaucon is daring Plato to prove him wrong. He's saying, if justice is really worth choosing, show me why. Not because of reputation, not because of reward. Show me that a just person, even one who's hated, punished, and stripped of everything, is still better off than an unjust person living in luxury. Plato takes the challenge. The entire Republic is in many ways his answer. He argues that justice isn't a social contract. It's the proper order of the soul. The unjust person might look free, but inside they're in chaos. Appetite rules. Reason is silenced. That's not freedom, that's slavery wearing a crown. The Ring of Gyges doesn't reveal what people would do if they were free. Plato argues it reveals what happens when the soul has no structure. And that, he says, is the worst kind of prison, one you can't even see. Plato didn't just criticize democracy. He ranked it among the worst forms of government, just one step above tyranny, and he had his reasons. In the Republic, Plato compares the state to a ship. The owner of the ship is the public, strong but partially blind, easily swayed. The sailors are the politicians, scheming, fighting over who gets to steer, flattering the owner to win control, but none of them actually know how to navigate. The true navigator, the one who studies the stars, the winds, the seasons, is ignored, mocked, called a stargazer, useless. That navigator is the philosopher, and Plato argues that democracy, by design, shuts him out. Here's the core of his objection. Democracy treats every opinion as equal. The cobbler's political judgment carries the same weight as the philosopher's. But Plato asks, would you let a random crowd vote on how to treat your illness? Would you let passengers steer the ship? Governing, he insists, is a skill, a craft. It requires knowledge, and most people simply don't have it. But it goes deeper than incompetence. Plato warns that democracy breeds a specific kind of soul, one addicted to freedom. Every desire is treated as equal. Every appetite is indulged. No hierarchy, no discipline. And when that kind of soul dominates a society, it creates a vacuum. Order collapses.
People grow exhausted by chaos, and they reach for the strong man, the tyrant. Plato argues that tyranny doesn't overthrow democracy, it grows out of it. Excess freedom flips into excess slavery. The most free society produces the most absolute ruler. He wasn't defending oligarchy or aristocracy blindly. He was making a sharper point. Governance without wisdom is just organized chaos, and popularity is not proof of truth. It never was. Plato's vision of the soul isn't peaceful, it's violent. In the Phaedrus, he gives us one of his most striking images, a charioteer driving two winged horses through the heavens. One horse is white, noble, disciplined. The other is dark, wild, barely controllable. And the charioteer? He's just trying to hold on. The charioteer represents reason. The white horse is spirit, the part of us that seeks honor, courage, self-respect. It responds to commands. It pulls upward. It wants to rise toward the divine, toward the forms, toward truth. The dark horse is appetite, and Plato doesn't hold back in describing it. This horse is ugly, crooked, deaf to reason. It lunges downward. It craves physical pleasure, immediate gratification, anything that satisfies the body. It doesn't care where the chariot is going. It wants what it wants, now. And these two horses aren't just pulling in different directions, they're fighting each other. The white horse strains upward toward the realm of the gods. The dark horse yanks downward toward the earth. The charioteer is caught in the middle, struggling, sweating, barely maintaining control. Plato argues that the soul's journey depends entirely on this struggle. If reason masters both horses, the soul ascends. It catches glimpses of the forms, beauty, justice, truth. It grows its wings. But if the dark horse wins, the soul plummets. It becomes heavy, earthbound, forgetful of everything it once knew. And here's the devastating part. Plato says most souls lose the fight. Most charioteers can't hold the reins. The dark horse is too strong, too relentless. So the soul falls into a body, forgetting the truths it once saw. The allegory isn't just poetry, it's Plato's diagnosis. The war inside you is real, and reason is outnumbered. This one catches people off guard. Plato, one of the greatest writers in human history, a man whose dialogues are filled with myth, metaphor, and vivid imagery, wanted to ban poetry from his ideal state. Not regulate it, ban it. In books 2, 3, and 10 of the Republic, Plato lays out his case. And it's not a casual opinion, it's a systematic, deeply thought-out argument. His first charge? Poetry is imitation, and not even imitation of reality, it's imitation of an imitation. A painter who paints a bed doesn't understand how to build one. He copies the appearance. And the original bed, that's already a copy of the form of the bed. So the poet, Plato argues, is 3 steps removed from truth. He produces beautiful illusions, nothing more. But that's not even the real danger. Here's what truly disturbs Plato. Poetry appeals to the emotions. It bypasses reason entirely. When you watch a tragic play, you weep. You feel rage, pity, desire. And Plato says those emotions, once stirred, don't stay in the theater. They bleed into your life. They weaken the rational soul. They feed the appetitive and spirited parts at the expense of the part that should be in command. He points out that Homer, the most revered poet in Greek culture, glorifies vengeful gods, cowardly heroes, and excessive grief, and the audience absorbs it, uncritically. Plato sees this as a form of moral corruption disguised as art. So he draws a hard line. In the just city,
only hymns to the gods and praises of good men are permitted. Everything else, gone. It sounds extreme. It is extreme. But Plato's underlying concern is worth sitting with. He's asking, what happens to a society that lets its emotions be shaped by artists who have no allegiance to truth? Around 387 BCE, Plato did something that would echo for nearly a millennium. He founded a school. Not just any school, the Academy, often considered the first institution of higher learning in the Western world. Located just outside the walls of Athens, in a grove sacred to the hero Academus, the school became the intellectual center of the ancient world. And it didn't just last a generation, it lasted roughly 900 years, until the Roman Emperor Justinian shut it down in 529 CE. 900 years. Let that sink in.
Plato didn't set up the Academy to teach rhetoric or produce politicians, though it did both. He built it around one central conviction: the pursuit of truth through disciplined thought. Mathematics, dialectic, astronomy, political theory, all of it structured, all of it rigorous. And the entrance requirement? Geometry. Not because Plato was obsessed with triangles, but because he believed mathematical reasoning trained the mind to think beyond the senses, to grasp abstract, unchanging truths. If you couldn't handle geometry, you weren't ready for philosophy. The Academy's influence is staggering. Aristotle studied there for 20 years. 20. The man who would go on to rival Plato himself was shaped inside those walls. Speusippus, Xenocrates, and a long line of successors carried the school forward, each generation reinterpreting, debating, and extending Plato's ideas. And the Academy wasn't static, it evolved. The so-called Middle and New Academy shifted toward skepticism, questioning the very doctrines Plato originally taught. But the institution survived. It adapted. It kept thinking. Plato didn't just write philosophy, he institutionalized it. He gave it a home, a structure, a tradition. And that single decision, to build a school rather than just write books, arguably did more to shape Western intellectual history than any of his dialogues alone.